I work at Google. I'm an engineering manager at Google, but that's not how this story started. I actually interviewed at Google in 2012, a year before I got the job. And I went through the whole process. I was very excited because I was not very happy with my job at the time. And I thought I did okay. And I was very excited about the prospect of working at Google. And I got rejected. It didn't come through,
All right, I want to introduce my guest, Tim. So, Tim is an accomplished engineering manager at Google with over 20 years of software development experience. Tim has honed his skills in leading teams, analyzing complex systems, and designing innovative solutions. His expertise extends beyond the realms of technology. He's also dedicated over a decade to teaching and mentoring graduate and undergraduate students. With a passion for both driving project success and fostering individual growth, Tim brings a wealth of knowledge and leadership to any organization he serves. Tim, welcome to the podcast. I just like to start by asking you, what has inspired you to do what you do, and what was that journey like to get to where you are now?
Well, that's a big introduction, man. I don't know if I can fit the bill, but we'll do the best we can here. I think as far as inspiration, growing up, I didn't have like the best role models. Like I grew up in a place that was, it was kind of a Rust Belt town in Appalachia, and it was the kind of place where like not everybody goes to college, and not kind of equally distributed opportunity, I would say. And I think that's something that's always kind of bothered me, because I think that's something, if you look across the country, like opportunity is not equally distributed. So I think that's something that has really inspired me. A lot of the outreach work that I do is trying to provide opportunity. Like some of the, like I do a little crowdfunding and investment, and a lot of that is like focused on things that just provide opportunity. I never really received a lot of like college advice. I remember, when I was in high school, it was on the radar. Like I was going to go to college, but like I didn't really get a lot of assistance from anybody until, after I took my SAT. I think it was my senior year. Like suddenly guidance counselors started to notice that like I was there, and I was going to go to college. So I didn't really get a whole lot of guidance. And then when I got to college, I was like, what do I do here? Like, how do I write a resume? Like, what classes should I be taking? How do I get into this industry? So I kind of had to navigate a lot of that myself. As far as positive role models, my grandfather, he was the kind of guy who, worked 3 jobs to support a family. And he was always, telling me like, get educated, like go like work smart. Don't work hard. So that, I could actually do something without having to work 3 jobs. Now it turns out I'm working 3 jobs half the time anyway, but like, at least it's stuff I'm passionate about and stuff I'm excited about. I don't have to do it.
And hearing that, I feel like you're uniquely prepared to give advice on people who are in a similar situation who don't have a lot of opportunity. What do you think helped get you through those times? What resources or maybe what tips would you recommend to people?
That's a really interesting area, because I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but when I was learning how to be a coder, it was not a simple or basic straightforward process. You couldn't just go on the internet and find tutorials. You couldn't just find free resources. I was fortunate enough that I had one high school teacher who really kind of understood the basics enough to he knew enough to give me the things he didn't know. He was definitely not a software engineer. He was not in that space, but he could kind of guide me into what I could learn on my own. And that was a really beneficial experience. Nowadays, though, I mean, you can go on YouTube, you can find millions of tutorials on any topic that you want. You don't need to pay $1,000 for, compilation software. You don't need to pay $5,000 for a desktop computer. Like you can go buy a Chromebook for $99, connect it to YouTube, use Google Cloud Platform or Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, or any of these, and you can start developing with basically very little start. Now, it's not that easy. If it was that easy, every single person would go do it. But I do think there's something to be said for taking charge of your education. Like I have a son right now, he's in high school, and sometimes they're like, oh, this teacher isn't good, or this, and it's like, it doesn't matter. Like you have to learn these things. You can't apply to colleges and say, asterisk, my teacher was bad. Like they don't care. They're looking at the numbers that you scored here. So I think that's really an important part of this, is taking ownership and being proactive about what you actually want to learn and how you're going to take advantage of that. The other thing that's amazing about software engineering and just coding in general is that you can just go do it. You don't, like, if you are really passionate about physics, you're probably not going to build a particle accelerator in your basement. But if you want to go build the next Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg did that in a dorm room, So I think that the idea is that it is very achievable to do the things that you need to do here, and it's actually pretty easy to get learn enough to be dangerous in this field. So I think that's a pretty nice thing about this particular space.
And you have a lot of experience in mentoring younger individuals. I mean, that's how we met. You were my mentor for a while and my teacher. And I'm curious, like, what have you found has stopped people in their growth, especially when pursuing a tech career?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I haven't had, the funny thing is that there's sort of like a negative signal here that I don't dwell on, which is if people stop reaching out to me, they might have stopped doing this thing. But generally, when people keep engaging, I can kind of help them through, or they can figure this out on their own. And I think maybe there's a little bit of knowledge or wisdom in that statement. You got to keep showing up. You got to keep coming at it. Step one is pretty much always show up. Anything you're going to do, I know you got into running in the last couple of years, right? So the thing they say about running, if you're training for a marathon or you're training for anything, like you get the miles in. Doesn't matter if they're good miles or bad miles, you get the miles in, and you can't get the miles in if you don't show up. So I think that that's really important. Is you got to keep trying. You got to keep sort of resetting yourself and getting back into it. From my perspective, I try to be available. I used to have this whole rigmarole where I'd send someone say, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And I'd say, "Okay, when are you available?" And then they'd send me something back, and then I know I'm not available those days. So I've tried to build a system, using a Google Doc and like Google Calendar that automates that whole process. That's made it a little bit easier to connect with people, and I find that actually removing the friction in some of these processes is really important because and I think the same thing goes for learning or for connecting with other people as well. It used to be before LinkedIn, you would have all this friction and like, how do I find these people? How do I contact them? What's the best way? Now on LinkedIn, you can send someone a connection request, you can add a note to it, you can do all of that like this. It's nothing. So I think trying to figure out ways to make it easier to do these things. This is a really dumb thing, but it's the way that human minds work. If I have to click 3 buttons to get to something, I might never find it. So no matter how bad I want to do it or how excited I am about it. So like removing the friction from your experience is really important. It just really helps you to kind of dive into things right away.
Sort of shifting gears a little bit more into your career and your career trajectory. So right now you're an engineering manager. I feel like that has its own special skill set. It's like a mix of technical and soft skills. How do you think you best prepare yourself for that role? And what do you think got you to that point in your career?
Oh, geez. Those are two different two different questions. I think that I knew pretty early on in my career that I liked writing code, but I didn't want to be a full time coder. So I just pursued opportunities that led me in that space. And I think again, being proactive here is going to be very helpful. I think uh, I probably could have sat somewhere and written code, or sat somewhere and not written code, and just sort of blended into the scenery and done fine. Like I don't know that I would have excelled in that environment. But I remember my first job out of college, I was so bored. I was so bored out of my mind. I just felt like there was nothing to do. And like I kept saying, like, give me more work, give me something interesting, like give me something I can like take hold of. And it actually never worked out at that place. I was continually bored, and I ended up leaving for a place that did keep me pretty busy and keep me pretty engaged and gave me some strong responsibilities. But there it was the same kind of thing. It was like, what can I do? What can I accomplish here? Um, I had one manager who I don't know that I ever really told him this, but I work. I know him. I still know him. I keep in touch with him. I see him. He actually works at Google now, so I talk to him once in a while. But he told me, I was waiting for something to compile. I'd written some code. I was like screwing around, like not doing my job at all. And he sat me down. And he was like, "You got to take ownership of this. Like this is like you can't just do something and then wait around for me to tell you the next thing to do. You got to take ownership." And it really spoke to me. And I think that's something that helped, across the board on just getting the next opportunity and growing a lot. So partly that, partly education. I pursued my MBA pretty close or pretty shortly after I graduated undergraduate. So I think just kind of showing people that you're excited, showing people, like I think that there's that old adage of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I think putting your hand up and people start to notice that you've got your hand up, even if you don't get called on the first couple of times.
Oh, I think that's very true. And going into your experience, I think something that I've learned is all the people that I look up to and who are really successful on the outside, we tend to put them on a pedestal, but like they go through their own challenges as well. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, with your experience being a manager, were there any challenges that you faced in your job, and how did you overcome that? Because I think it's important just to hear that story. Like, how do these really successful people like face challenges in their lives?
So you touched on something that's really important there, which is everybody's just a human being, and I think I tell this to college students all the time. Like, your professors are people; they're just human beings. They've got the same sort of flaws and tendencies and problems, and the things that they look for, the things they like. They're just like everybody else. They're just people, and I think we do have this sort of habit of putting people up on a pedestal, as you said. Where we kind of treat them as like a different kind of thing. Like, we're both human beings, but you're a different kind of human being. But I think that when you understand that everybody is kind of the same and still has sort of the same interest, desires, like problems, it does sort of ground you a little bit. Like, I always tell my students, like, make sure your professors know your name. If they have a relationship with you, it's not that they won't fail you. It's just they'll have to think twice about it. Because they know there's a human being on the other side of that grade. So for me, I've had a lot of setbacks. Like, I've had a lot of things that just didn't go my way. And, I like to ask people in interviews, like, tell me a time you failed at something, because I find if someone can't relay a story of when they failed at something, they're probably too arrogant for me to want to work with them. Like, is really what it comes down to. But there's knowledge in failure. Um, one thing that happened to me, I work at Google. I'm an engineering manager at Google, but that's not how this story started. I actually interviewed at Google in 2012, a year before I got the job, and I went through the whole process. I was very excited because I was not very happy with my job at the time, and I was thought I did okay, and I was very excited about the prospect of working at Google, and I got rejected. It didn't come through. Like, I flew out to Mountain View, California. Like, I did the whole thing. Like, it was up to the last decision, and I got rejected. And like, part of me was like, this is stupid. I'm just going to go make my own Google, like, whatever, like, I don't care. And after I sort of calmed down a little bit and realized, probably good reasons why I didn't get hired here. Let me think about the things I should be working on. And at that time, I had really moved away from coding, and I hadn't really, my skills weren't as strong as they used to be. And probably didn't answer all the questions the best way that I could have. And I probably sounded a little bit arrogant, kind of like a jerk in the interview. So, like, it gave me a lot of things to really consider. And I think that introspection was really important because at that point I had really put a lot of myself into this. Like, I was pretty convinced, like, this was the thing I wanted to do. This was the thing I was going to do. Um, but I think you always deal with failure. You always deal with these setbacks. You always deal with things that just don't go your way. So the question is not what are those things. The question is, what do you do about them? Like, what kind of lessons can you take from that? Uh, I think a hard thing to learn when you're growing up is that despite your best efforts, despite doing everything the right way, despite everything sort of going exactly the way you wanted it to, it still might not be the result that you want. And so I think sometimes it just doesn't go. Sometimes you do all of those things and there's just somebody who's a little bit better than you were. When I was in grad school back in my MBA program, I remember there was this like IT management rotational program, and I was one of the two finalists, and somebody else got it. And it was like, I don't know if, in retrospect, there are probably things I could work on. I don't know that if there was anything that was better or worse, just they went this other direction. And sometimes it's just about finding a better fit. But I do think every time you have one of these situations, it's important to think about, is this something that I lost, or is this something that I didn't win? Because I think those are two different things. I think if I didn't win this and they just went somewhere else, maybe there's not a lesson there, and there's not always a lesson in everything. But a lot of times, what could I have done better? How could I have made this go differently? Those are good questions to be asking, to think about. How do I improve and how do I do this better the next time?
Mm. Someone who I watch a lot is Ryan Holiday. I don't know if you know him, but he's like big on stoicism, like life
Mm,
philosophy. I feel like that's an example of something he says where in every situation you either choose the smooth handle or the rough handle. And the smooth handle is just the perspective of if you look at it as this is something that happened for me. This is something that I can take advantage of. Even if it
mm.
doesn't go your way, there still can be a positive outcome from that.
Yeah, totally, totally.
And I think something else I would like to ask is, to put yourself in that situation and to have that reaction is not easy. Like, Do you have any practices or habits that make that easier for you, sort of decrease the friction?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, a cliche people pass on a lot is this: it's just business. Like, this is just business. Um, but there is something that I find, maybe this might be morbid, or it might not be the right kind of message, but there was a moment in my life where I realized the universe does not care about me at all. Like, cosmically speaking, my lifetime is not even a blink of an eye. Like, it just doesn't, I am irrelevant to the state of the universe. And I think we all are. And I think even the most famous people in history, 5,000 years from now, 6,000 people years from now, are people even going to know who that is? So I think that with that sort of perspective, you can kind of think a little bit more objectively about when you have these failures or when things don't go your way. Because I think a lot of times it's not a conspiracy. It's not something like, it's not some kind of like, like base level judgment that the universe is passing on you. The universe doesn't, it's not that the universe doesn't care about you. The universe doesn't even know you exist. So I find that very liberating thought, actually, because I think at that point now it's not what has happened to me, it's what do I have the agency to change. And I think that's a really, really important way to look at this. I think once you kind of recognize that, as far as the universe is concerned, like, the universe doesn't even know that you're there. I think that that sort of opens it up. So it's like not something, it's not a problem that, has been handed to me. This is something that I have to take the responsibility to actually go address.
And lastly, I want to ask you, I think the average age of people who watch the podcast is between 18 and 24. So there are lots of young people who
Good.
watch it. And so I like to ask you, what advice would you give someone who's in high school, college, early in their career, who they don't really have purpose, they don't really know what they want to do, they don't have a direction? Like, what
Mhm.
advice would you give those people?
Oh man, so I don't know how much time you have here, but one thing I would say, and on the like, what do we do and where do we go? There's a really important question to ask yourself. I find this as a really useful exercise, um, which is, if you can think about a time in your life, it might have been high school, might have been something you did in the summer, might have been a job that you had, it might have been an internship, it might have been any number of experiences. So don't limit yourself to, the type of experience. But if you can think of a time in your life where every day you woke up and you just couldn't wait to go do that thing. Every day you woke up and you were going to go jump into that. Once you have something like that, you can really start to dig into it. What is it about that experience that I enjoyed so much? What was it that I really liked? What was it that motivated me in this situation? What was I getting out of this situation? What was I putting into it? Like, why was it so engaging for me? Once you start thinking about that, it starts to become a lot more obvious where you should go or what you should be doing. That kind of shows you what are the inputs that are going to feed you. Like, and I think that I read this article. I wish I had saved the article because I can't remember who wrote it, and I can't remember, like, I don't even know what publication it was in. But it was a woman talking about burnout, and basically she said, when people are getting something out of what they're doing, they never get burnout. Like, you have infinite energy if you feel like you're making an impact and you feel like there's value in work. People get burnout when there's no, it seems like there's no benefit. And I think that's really related to this particular topic. As long as you're doing something that you are getting what you need out of it and you feel like you're making a difference in what you're doing, you'll find that you can do that forever. But you're going to start to really drag as soon as you get to the point where you feel like it's pointless or where you feel like you're not really getting that. So asking some of those questions can really help you to avoid burnout. Because, I'll tell you, um, there have been times in my life where I've worked 80-hour weeks sustained for, months and been super happy about it. And there have been times in my life where I've worked 30-hour weeks sustained for months and kind of not really been super happy with it for exactly that reason. You got to feel like you're getting something out of these processes. But other than that, being proactive, taking ownership, showing people, I think, is something that I can point to so many times in my career where I had a thought and I expressed that thought and I tried to convince somebody that, it was a good idea. I tried to even maybe draw pictures and show them it was a good idea, but like actually showing someone something functional and like building a demo, like, demonstrating is better than showing is better than saying is better than thinking. But when you can build a demo to really convince somebody, you can actually allow them to interact with something. You'll find that you make a lot of progress. So I think all of those have really helped me in my career.
Awesome. That's all really great advice. A tradition that we have on the podcast is I always ask my guests, do you have any book recommendations?
All right. So I was prepared for this one because, we talked a little bit about it. So this is a book. This is called The Ascent of Information. And I just picked this up off of a shelf at Barnes and Noble. And it's fascinating. This is a really solid book. It basically talks about how maybe the guiding the guiding hand of the universe is information as opposed to life, and it kind of breaks things down in a lot of different ways. But this book really, like, I took a lot of, it's the kind of book that I read it and then thought about it for months, and I just be doing something normally, and then the thought, some passage from the book would jump in my head, and just really reflect on it. So I really like that book. This is probably the best book on engineering management that I've ever read, and this is a really old version. They're probably new versions, but it's funny. It's like a jokey kind of book, but I find the advice to actually be really prescient and accurate for this field. And then fiction wise, this is Flowers for Algernon. I don't know. It's there you go. So Flowers for Algernon. I think it's just a good book about overcoming obstacles and sort of becoming bigger or more than you are. And it's something that always spoke to me. I remember reading it in high school and thinking, wow, what a great book. And I got my kids to read it. They liked it too. So I think that's a pretty solid work of fiction.
Awesome. And where can people find you if they want to connect or keep up with you?
I do have a YouTube channel that is not super well maintained. I talk about programming and I do some like instructive things there, and I offer classes there. So if you search for Timothy James Pittsburgh, you'll find me on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn too, but I don't know. I don't accept all of the connections. Maybe that's not a good thing to send people off to. But I try to stay out of social media these days. I just find it to be a little. I don't, back to the question of advice, like I don't get as much out of it as I feel like I need to put into it. So I find that, I'm trying to figure out a way to like get rid of my phone entirely and just use a watch for
Oh man.
alerts, because I find everything I want to do, I'm like 10 times more productive on a computer with a keyboard and like actually like a viewable, readable screen. And when I'm on my phone, I find I'm just wasting time. Like I'm just, doom scrolling through the
Yeah.
infinite
Yep.
abyss of advertisements and
Yep.
things I don't care about. So I find that the computer is a much better instrument for me.
Gotcha. Well, I'll make sure all of the links and everything that Tim mentioned will be in the description. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was awesome.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.